Feminism isn't a trend, a threat, or a war cry, it's a mirror. And the question it reflects back at each of us is simple but powerful. What kind of world do you want to live in? What if I told you feminism was never about taking power away from someone else, but about returning power to those it was silently stolen from? What if I told you that to dismiss feminism is not to reject women, but to reject fairness, dignity, and the future we could build together? This isn't a debate for classrooms or parliaments alone. This is personal. This is global. This is now. That's why I invite you to listen, not just to me, but to the echoes of every woman, every girl, every human who's ever felt like their voice was too small to matter. Because the story of feminism is not just history, it's prophecy. Let's start at the roots. The first wave of feminism emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with a simple but radical mission: suffrage, the right to vote. It sounds almost quaint now, but at the time it was revolutionary. Women were told they lacked the capacity to participate in politics, that their place was in the home, and yet they marched, they bled, they were imprisoned, and still they persisted, not for privilege, but for presence. Then came the second wave, roaring through the 1960s to the 1980s, where the conversation shifted from legal rights to personal realities. Workplace discrimination, reproductive rights, sexual autonomy. This was not about breaking glass ceilings alone, it was about rebuilding entire rooms. The fight was louder, fiercer, more complex. Feminism grew teeth, and with it came backlash, but truth doesn't need to shout when its roots run deep. The third wave, in the 1990s, dared to do what the previous waves hadn't. It questioned itself. It asked, whose feminism are we fighting for? It opened doors to diversity, demanded recognition of race, class, and sexuality. It said feminism could wear lipstick or combat boots. It could be academic or street level. It could be flawed, but it would keep learning. And now we are in the fourth wave, an age of hashtags and headlines, but also of reckoning. This wave is digital, but it's deeply emotional. It calls out microaggressions and megaphones injustice. It demands accountability, inclusivity, and an end to silence. From Others Me Too to movements for marginalized communities, it is intersectional, or it is irrelevant. Feminism today doesn't ask for equality in theory, it demands equity in practice. But understanding feminism isn't just about chronology, it's about complexity. There are many types of feminism, and they don't always agree, but they all matter. Liberal feminism works within systems to reform laws and institutions. Radical feminism seeks to dismantle patriarchy from its very roots. Marxist feminism analyzes capitalism and how it entangles with gender oppression. Cultural feminism celebrates the differences between men and women as strengths. Ecofeminism connects the domination of nature with the domination of women. Intersectional feminism ties them all together, insisting that race, class, disability, and identity are inseparable from gender. It's tempting to ask, why all these types? Why not just one clean definition? But the truth is, feminism is not a monolith. It is a mosaic. And the more pieces we include, the clearer the picture becomes. The reality is that feminism has been misunderstood and misrepresented. It's been labeled as man-hating, aggressive, extreme. But the truth is, feminism at its core is about choice. The choice to speak, the choice to lead, the choice to live freely, safely, equally, no matter your gender. And it's not a women's issue, it's a human rights issue. Feminism invites everyone to be braver, softer, more just. It doesn't weaken men. It liberates them too, from toxic norms, from impossible standards, from silence. We live in a world that still punishes women for their ambition and men for their vulnerability. That's not progress, that's programming, and it's time we rewrite it. Feminism is not the end of masculinity, it's the rebirth of humanity. It's the chance to raise a generation that is not taught who to dominate, but how to empathize. It's not about flipping the power structure, it's about dissolving it, creating a new one that thrives on balance. You might be thinking, where do I fit into this? The answer is exactly where you stand. You fit here. Your voice matters. Your action matters. Feminism isn't something you wear. It's something you live. Feminism is not hatred. It's hope. That statement may sound like a contradiction to those who have only ever encountered feminism through the lens of stereotypes, misinformation, or social media outrage. Too often, feminism is misconstrued as a movement of anger, vengeance, or anti-male sentiment. But at its heart, feminism is the language of hope, a belief that society can be better, fairer, more compassionate. It is the audacity to envision a world where equality is not a debate, but a given. It is the determination to create systems that uplift rather than silence, structures that include rather than exclude, and a culture that celebrates individuality rather than punishing it. Feminism is not a clenched fist, though it may need to fight. It is an outstretched hand, calling for partnership, justice, and shared progress. To believe in feminism is to believe in the possibility of transformation, not only external transformation in laws or politics, but internal transformation in minds and hearts. Feminism begins in the deeply personal space of questioning what we have always been told. It asks a girl why her dreams were labeled too ambitious, and a boy why his tears were mocked. It asks workplaces why women are still paid less, and households why daughters do more unpaid labor. But instead of stopping at critique, feminism asks, what if we did it differently? What if strength wasn't measured in silence or sacrifice, but in solidarity? What if power wasn't something to hoard, but something to share? Feminism is a lens that doesn't just expose injustice, it imagines what justice could actually feel like, sound like, and look like for everyone. This movement, this hope, is not about one gender rising above another. It is about undoing the hierarchy entirely. Patriarchy harms more than just women. It teaches men that value equals dominance, that masculinity must mean aggression, that softness is shameful. It limits expression, silences emotion, and turns competition into cruelty. Feminism sees this clearly and says, enough. It is not a threat to men. It is a liberation for them too, to redefine strength, to embrace vulnerability, to step out of the rigid boxes society has placed on all of us. Feminism's hope is not selective, it is inclusive. It reaches out to everyone whose identity, voice, or humanity has been diminished or denied. Whether you are a woman navigating a hostile workspace, a man afraid to cry in front of his son, or a non-binary person seeking recognition in a binary world, feminism is for you. At its essence, feminism is an act of profound love. Love for justice, for fairness, for future generations. It is the mother who teaches her daughter that her worth isn't tied to her beauty. It's the father who tells his son that real courage means kindness. It's the teacher who refuses to let girls be interrupted in the classroom. It's the protester who demands laws that protect survivors. These are not acts of hate. They are acts of healing. Feminism gives language to pain that has been unnamed for centuries. It gives structure to change that once seemed impossible. And it gives people, especially the young, a belief that their voice matters, their struggle is valid, and their dreams deserve space. Hope doesn't mean ignoring the harsh realities we face. It means facing them with resolve. It means confronting the fact that women still fear walking alone at night, that victims of harassment are still doubted, that millions of girls are still denied education, safety, and agency. But rather than sinking into despair, feminism says, let's rise. Let's not wait for permission to be equal. Let's not apologize for demanding fairness. Let's not shrink ourselves to fit into molds we never chose. Let's expand what's possible, together. Feminism is not naive. It is courageous. It dares to expect more from systems, from people, from the future. The hope feminism offers is generational. It plants seeds in one era that bloom in the next. The women who marched for suffrage did not live to see all the victories they made possible, but they marched anyway. The activists of the second wave pushed boundaries so the next generation could dream bigger. Today, feminists fight for rights and recognition, not only for themselves, but for the children they will never meet. That is the ultimate hope, to create a world that is kinder, freer, and more just than the one we inherited. A world where equality is not revolutionary, but normal. Where diversity is not feared, but embraced. Where justice is not an exception, but an expectation. Feminism's strength is rooted in this unshakable belief that such a world is not only worth fighting for, it is within reach. And even when progress feels painfully slow, even when backlash grows louder, even when the road forward is unclear, feminism endures. Because it is not sustained by trends or applause, it is sustained by hope, by people who choose every day to stand up when it would be easier to sit down, to speak when silence would be safer, to believe in equity even when inequality feels endless. Feminism doesn't guarantee easy answers, but it offers a path lit by courage, paved with solidarity, and driven by a simple but radical dream, that everyone, regardless of gender, can live in dignity. That fairness isn't a favor, it's a right. That the future we are building does not have to look like the past we are leaving behind. The first wave gave women a voice, the second gave them space, the third gave them power, and now the fourth demands justice for all. To truly understand the magnitude of that sentence is to trace the evolution of one of the most significant social movements in human history. Feminism has never been stagnant. It has morphed, shifted, redefined itself, and expanded its scope across generations and geographies. It has never settled for crumbs when the table belonged to everyone. Each wave of feminism arose from a specific cry, a desperate need to be heard, to be counted, to be respected, and while each wave brought its own triumphs and limitations, together they form the relentless tide that continues to push humanity forward. The first wave of feminism was born in the late 19th and early 20th centuries out of necessity, out of a burning injustice that denied women even the most basic civic rights, at a time when women were treated as dependents, as legal extensions of their husbands or fathers. The idea of having a political voice was radical. This wave was defined primarily by the fight for suffrage, but beneath that banner was a deeper demand: recognition. These women were not only asking for the right to vote, they were fighting to be seen as citizens, as individuals with agency. They organized, protested, and endured brutal resistance, all for the simple right to participate in the democratic process. Their struggle wasn't perfect. It often prioritized white, middle-class women and left behind women of color and working-class voices, but it cracked open the door. It gave women a voice, not just metaphorically, but literally. It allowed them to say, publicly and politically, "We are here." Then came the second wave in the 1960s through the 1980s, ignited by the dissatisfaction many women felt even after gaining the vote. Society still expected them to return to kitchens and silence, but the fire that had been lit by suffragists grew into something uncontainable. This wave expanded feminism's reach from legal equality into social, cultural, and economic spheres. Women demanded the right to work, to control their reproductive health, to be protected from domestic violence and sexual harassment. This era gave women space, not just physical space in universities and workplaces, but psychological space to explore who they were beyond the roles society had confined them to. It challenged traditional gender roles and questioned systemic power dynamics in families, institutions, and relationships. While it still struggled with inclusivity, it was a seismic shift in how women saw themselves and how they were seen. It was no longer just about being allowed to vote. It was about being allowed to exist freely in every dimension of life. The third wave rose in the 1990s, carried by a new generation that was determined not just to expand feminism, but to deconstruct it and reconstruct it more truthfully. This wave gave women power, not the illusion of power handed out by systems that still favored patriarchy, but the awareness that their identities were complex, diverse, and valid. It refused to ignore race, sexuality, class, or gender identity. It questioned the feminist narratives of the past and refused to conform to a single definition of what it meant to be a woman. It embraced contradiction, celebrated individuality, and made room for voices that had long been excluded. This wave saw feminism not as a monologue, but as a conversation, a constantly evolving dialogue that must listen to those on the margins. Power in this context was about ownership, ownership of one's body, one's identity, one's narrative. It was about turning feminism from a movement into a mindset. Now we are in the fourth wave, a period marked by digital activism, intersectional awareness, and an uncompromising call for justice. This wave refuses to pretend that equality has been achieved. It acknowledges the gains made by previous generations, but it also recognizes the gaps, the exclusions, the wounds that still exist. The fourth wave demands justice for all, not just for women in boardrooms or on ballots, but for trans women, disabled women, Indigenous women, women of color, non-binary individuals, and all those whose voices have been historically suppressed. It uses technology to amplify stories that were once buried. Hashtags have become battle cries. Social media has become both weapon and witness. The fourth wave fights for survivors of abuse, challenges rape culture, calls out workplace inequities, and redefines consent, power, and freedom in a rapidly changing world. But most importantly, it centers justice. Justice not as charity, but as a right, not as a personal victory, but as a collective necessity. Each wave of feminism has been shaped by its time, each one a response to a different form of oppression. But the common thread that binds them is courage, the courage to demand more when society says enough, to stand up when history has taught silence, and to believe that change is possible even when the path is steep. The first wave gave women the right to speak. The second gave them room to move. The third taught them to claim their stories. And the fourth insists those stories must be heard, believed, and honored, regardless of who tells them. This journey of feminism has never been linear. It's been messy, painful, and imperfect, but it's also been unstoppable, guided by the belief that every human being deserves to live without chains, whether legal, cultural, or psychological. Feminism wears many faces: liberal, radical, Marxist, eco, cultural, intersectional, but its heartbeat is the same: dignity. That word, dignity, is the unshakable core that connects every branch, every movement, every variant of feminism that has ever existed. It is the idea that every individual, regardless of gender, deserves to live with agency, safety, respect, and worth. Feminism may be fragmented in form, debated in strategy, and diverse in philosophy, but each of its iterations grows from the same soil, a refusal to accept that inequality is natural, deserved, or acceptable. The differences between these types of feminism are not signs of division, but of richness, different lenses looking at the same mountain of systemic oppression, all trying to climb it in their own way. They are not competing answers to one question, but parallel inquiries into how to live more justly, more freely, and more fully. Liberal feminism, one of the most mainstream forms, advocates for equality through legal reform and policy change. It believes in working within existing structures, governments, laws, corporations, to bring about incremental and sustainable progress. Liberal feminists push for equal pay, reproductive rights, anti-discrimination laws, and access to education. Their focus is often individualistic, aiming to ensure that women have the same rights and opportunities as men under the law. Critics argue that liberal feminism can sometimes be too comfortable within the very systems that uphold patriarchal norms. But its contribution to feminism is undeniable. It has helped secure real-world victories that have tangibly changed lives, such as voting rights, anti-harassment laws, and workplace protections. Its heartbeat of dignity pulses through its commitment to fairness, representation, and systemic inclusion. Radical feminism takes a more foundational stance, arguing that patriarchy is embedded so deeply into society that true equality cannot be achieved without dismantling the very institutions that perpetuate male dominance. It is not satisfied with merely adding women into existing systems. It demands that we rebuild those systems entirely. Radical feminism critiques family structures, religion, media, and even language, asserting that patriarchy has shaped every facet of life in ways that devalue, objectify, and silence women. This form of feminism is unapologetically bold. It names the violence, exposes the roots, and forces uncomfortable conversations. Though often misunderstood or mischaracterized as extreme, radical feminism insists that liberation cannot come without revolution. Its pursuit of dignity is about reclaiming bodily autonomy, emotional truth, and the right to exist beyond control. Marxist feminism sees capitalism and patriarchy as deeply intertwined forces that sustain each other. It argues that women's oppression is not just cultural, but economic, rooted in systems of labor exploitation and wealth inequality. Under this view, unpaid domestic labor, wage gaps, and economic dependency are not accidents, but features of a capitalist patriarchal world. Marxist feminism critiques how women's work, whether caregiving, cleaning, or emotional labor, is undervalued and invisibilized. It connects the struggles of working-class women with class struggle itself and pushes for collective action, labor rights, and social ownership of resources. Dignity here is defined through access, not just to rights, but to resources, stability, and participation in shaping economic realities. Ecofeminism makes a unique and urgent connection between the exploitation of women and the exploitation of the earth. It critiques how both nature and women have been treated as passive, exploitable, and endlessly available by patriarchal and capitalist systems. Ecofeminists argue that the degradation of the environment and the degradation of feminine labor are linked by the same logic of domination. This perspective is particularly powerful in communities where women bear the brunt of environmental crises, walking miles for water, being displaced by climate disasters, or suffering from pollution-related illnesses. Ecofeminism calls for sustainability not just in our ecosystems, but in our social systems. It calls for a reconnection with the earth, with each other, and with our inherent interdependence. The dignity it seeks is one that honors life in all its forms, human, animal, and ecological. Cultural feminism, often less politically aggressive, focuses on celebrating the unique qualities that have traditionally been associated with femininity: nurturing, empathy, cooperation, and emotional intelligence. Rather than fighting to erase gender differences, cultural feminism argues that these differences should be respected and valued. It aims to elevate the feminine not by comparing it to the masculine, but by insisting that qualities labeled as feminine are not weak, but essential. While this can sometimes risk reinforcing essentialist views of gender, it also provides a counter-narrative to societies that have historically equated strength with aggression and leadership with domination. Cultural feminism's form of dignity is about pride in traits, roles, and identities that the dominant culture has dismissed or degraded. Intersectional feminism, arguably the most expansive and urgent branch today, asserts that feminism must account for overlapping identities: race, class, sexuality, disability, religion, nationality, that shape how different women experience oppression. Coined by Kimberlé Crenshaw, intersectionality is not a niche concern, but a necessary framework. It asks not just are women oppressed, but which women and how. A black woman's experience of sexism is not the same as that of a white woman's. A queer woman's safety is compromised in ways a cisgender woman might not understand. Intersectional feminism demands that the feminist movement look inward, challenge its blind spots, and center those most marginalized. Dignity here is about recognition, about being seen in one's fullness, about being included not as a token, but as a leader in the conversation about justice. These forms of feminism may differ in strategy, philosophy, and focus, but none of them operate from a place of hatred. They are, at their core, declarations of worth. They are about believing that people should not be hurt, dismissed, or denied because of who they are. They are about building a world where human value is not contingent upon gender, wealth, whiteness, or conformity. They are about restoring dignity in every corner it has been stripped away, from the classroom to the courtroom, from the workplace to the bedroom, from the street to the screen. Each face of feminism, with all its complexities and contradictions, is a mirror reflecting the shared demand for humanity to be respected in its many forms. Intersectionality is not optional anymore. It's the lens that ensures no one is left behind in the conversation. For too long, feminism risked becoming a singular narrative, one that prioritized the struggles and voices of the most visible, the most powerful, or the most privileged within its ranks. But the real world is not that simple. It is layered, complex, and often unforgiving to those who do not fit neatly into the most recognizable boxes. Gender alone is not the only axis of oppression. Race, class, sexuality, disability, immigration status, religion, and many more facets of identity intersect to shape how a person experiences the world. Intersectionality recognizes this truth and demands that feminism do the same. It is not a new add-on to the movement. It is the corrective lens, the ethical compass, and the blueprint for building a truly inclusive path forward. Coined by legal scholar Kimberlé Crenshaw, the term intersectionality was born from observing how Black women were being failed by both anti-racist and feminist frameworks. They were too often excluded from conversations that only focused on race or only focused on gender, as if these experiences could be separated. Crenshaw exposed the danger of single-axis thinking. When systems only account for one identity at a time, they erase the compounded realities of those who live at multiple, overlapping margins. Intersectionality revealed that the default woman in many feminist movements was white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, and middle class, and by centering only that experience, feminism was inadvertently perpetuating the very exclusions it aimed to dismantle. Intersectionality was not a theory for the margins, it was a map to the center that had been distorted for generations. To understand why intersectionality is essential, one must listen to the lived realities of those most affected by its absence. A transgender woman of color faces a different kind of threat than a white cisgender woman. Her risks multiply, not just the threat of gender-based violence, but of racial profiling, medical discrimination, housing insecurity, and transphobia. A disabled woman fighting for employment equality is not just up against sexism, but also ableism and often classism. A queer immigrant woman might find herself navigating homophobic legal systems, xenophobic bureaucracies, and patriarchal cultural expectations all at once. Intersectionality shows us that oppression does not operate in silos, it stacks, it compounds, and if feminism does not address this complexity, it cannot claim to be a movement for all. Intersectional feminism is not just about representation, it is about redistribution. It's about shifting the power structures within feminism itself. It's not enough to invite marginalized voices to the table as a token gesture. Intersectional feminism insists that those who have long been silenced must be centered, must be heard, must be believed, and must lead. It calls for dismantling hierarchies within the movement, where privilege still determines whose pain is prioritized, whose stories are told, and whose victories are celebrated. It is a call to accountability, not comfort. It means those with privilege within feminism, whether it's whiteness, wealth, education, or cis-identity, must do the work of unlearning, of listening without defensiveness, and of using their platforms to amplify others rather than dominate them. Practicing intersectionality also transforms the goals of feminism. It pushes beyond policy demands that only benefit the most resourced and instead demands justice that reaches the most vulnerable. For example, when feminists fight for reproductive rights, intersectionality asks, are we only talking about access to clinics in wealthy urban areas, or are we fighting for incarcerated women, for undocumented women, for those without health insurance? When we talk about workplace equality, are we only concerned with corporate boardrooms, or are we advocating for domestic workers, factory workers, and single mothers who can't afford childcare? Intersectional feminism doesn't let us stop at surface-level victories. It forces us to ask, who is missing from this progress, and why? Intersectionality is not just theory, it is practice. It is choosing to ask harder questions, to sit with more discomfort, to expand the scope of our empathy. It requires humility to admit when feminism has failed certain groups. It demands imagination to build solutions that account for layered oppression. It means organizing not just around shared gender identity, but around shared humanity. It means seeing the fight for racial justice, disability justice, economic justice, and LGBTQ+ rights as inherently feminist battles, not side issues, but central pillars. It means understanding that liberation is not a zero-sum game. When we fight for the most marginalized, we create systems that are safer, more just, and more humane for everyone. Intersectionality is also a safeguard against the erasure of identities in a world that still favors the dominant narrative. Without it, feminism risks replicating the same structures of oppression it claims to resist. Intersectionality reminds us that progress for some cannot come at the expense of others. It teaches us that feminism must be expansive, adaptive, and willing to evolve. It is not weakness to admit that we've overlooked someone, it is strength to correct it. Intersectionality offers a way forward where no voice is too small, no experience too complex, and no injustice too inconvenient to confront. It demands more from feminism, not just in breadth, but in depth, in compassion, and in truth. Feminism is not a gendered movement. It's a human movement, one that invites everyone to rise. To understand this truth is to break free from the common misconceptions that continue to cloud the purpose and power of feminism. For too long, feminism has been narrowly framed as a women versus men agenda, as if one gender's empowerment means the diminishment of another's. That flawed narrative has diluted the movement's urgency and created resistance from those who misinterpret its intent. But feminism has never been about exclusion. It's been about liberation. It seeks to dismantle systems that dehumanize, diminish, and divide people based on gender, yes, but at its core it demands dignity, fairness, and opportunity for all people, regardless of how they identify. It is not a rebellion against men. It is a refusal to accept a world where humanity is valued unequally. At its essence, feminism calls out the imbalance that has long shaped societies, where power is disproportionately held by one group, and worth is measured through patriarchal ideals. This imbalance affects everyone. When boys are told that vulnerability is weakness, that expressing emotion is unmanly, they suffer under the same toxic constructs feminism aims to abolish. When fathers are denied custody, not because of their capacity to parent, but because of outdated assumptions about gender roles, they too feel the impact. When men are taught to dominate rather than collaborate, when they are discouraged from asking for help, from nurturing, from showing tenderness, they are boxed into a version of masculinity that stifles rather than uplifts. Feminism does not aim to feminize men, it seeks to humanize them. It opens the door for new definitions of strength, leadership, and identity that go beyond stereotypes. It creates space for men to break free from destructive molds and embrace the full range of their humanity. Feminism is not about flipping the power structure, it's about leveling it. It doesn't ask for special treatment, it demands equal treatment. It says that women deserve equal pay, not because they are women, but because they are workers, that they deserve safety not because they are fragile, but because they are human, that their ideas, voices, and leadership are valuable not in contrast to men, but in collaboration with them. And when this equality is realized, everyone wins. Companies perform better when gender diversity is respected. Families thrive when caregiving is shared. Communities grow stronger when decision-making is inclusive. Feminism is the blueprint for a more compassionate and balanced world, not because it elevates one gender above another, but because it refuses to rank human worth at all. And this invitation to rise, it extends to every corner of society. It calls on educators to reimagine classrooms where girls aren't discouraged from science and boys aren't mocked for loving art. It challenges religious institutions to examine doctrines that relegate women to silence. It urges political systems to ensure representation that reflects the diversity of the people. Feminism asks parents to raise children who understand that respect is not earned through dominance but through empathy. It compels media creators to tell stories where women aren't just sidekicks or victims, and men aren't just saviors or villains, but where everyone is fully human, fully complex, and fully seen. Feminism pushes beyond rhetoric into tangible, transformative action that builds equality not just in words, but in practice. For those who fear feminism, it's often because they've been told it's about blame. But feminism is not a blame game. It's a truth-telling movement. It names the structures that harm, not to shame individuals, but to liberate them from roles they never chose. It doesn't seek to erase gender. It seeks to end the hierarchy of gender. It honors difference without assigning superiority. It believes that when girls are empowered to lead, boys are freed from the burden of always having to. That when women are safe to walk alone at night, men are less likely to be taught that aggression equals masculinity. Feminism insists that we can all live better, freer, fuller lives when equality becomes the standard, not the exception. So this movement, this human movement, is not exclusive, it is expansive. It is not fixed in ideology, but fluid in compassion. It welcomes men as allies, not enemies. It values conversations, not confrontations. It teaches that allyship is not a threat to one's identity, but an expression of one's integrity. Feminism does not shrink anyone, it invites growth. It does not silence men, it listens to them, challenges them, and believes they are capable of standing on the side of justice. And it does not ask anyone to be less, it calls on everyone to be more aware, more accountable, more courageous. Because when one person rises, we all rise. When equality becomes collective, so does progress. Feminism, at its core, is not a war between genders. It is a call to humanity, urging every individual to recognize their worth and the worth of others, and to build a world where no one's voice is smaller simply because of who they are.
We must move from performative feminism to transformative change, where equity is lived, not just spoken. The danger of performative feminism lies in its appearance. It looks like progress, sounds like awareness, and wears the right slogans, but beneath the surface, it often lacks depth, intention, and accountability. It is the Instagram caption with the right hashtag, the boardroom statement made during Women's History Month, the brand campaign that touts girl power without addressing systemic inequities within its own workforce. Performative feminism is polished, palatable, and convenient. It speaks when it is trendy, but remains silent when it is hard. It may elevate the image of being an ally, but it rarely commits to the discomfort of real change. It is easier to say, "we support women," than to restructure pay systems. It is easier to share a viral quote about empowerment than to dismantle the structures that disempower. But the truth is, the world does not need more appearances of progress. It needs tangible, measurable, and enduring transformation. Transformative feminism is rooted in action. It does not stop at awareness. It uses awareness as a springboard into policy, into culture shifts, into reallocation of resources, into equity that can be felt in daily life. It does not just admire the idea of justice, it insists on it. It is the organization that doesn't just hire women, but promotes them, pays them equally, and protects them from workplace harassment. It is the school system that doesn't just celebrate women in history 1 month out of the year, but builds a curriculum that reflects their contributions, their struggles, and their voices all year long. It is the government that doesn't just speak about equality in speeches, but passes legislation that closes loopholes, funds protection programs, and listens to the needs of marginalized women. Transformative feminism looks like equitable maternity and paternity leave. It looks like free and accessible menstrual products. It looks like support for survivors of abuse, not just with words, but with shelters, legal aid, therapy, and systems that prioritize their dignity and safety. It looks like amplifying the voices of Indigenous women, Black women, queer women, disabled women, not as a diversity checkbox, but as essential leadership in shaping solutions. It demands that we ask the hard questions. Who is missing? Who is being centered? Who is being tokenized? Who is benefiting from this narrative? And who is being left behind? Transformative change is not easy. It is messy. It is slow. And it challenges deeply embedded beliefs. It calls for reflection, confrontation, and the humility to say, we were wrong, and here's what we're doing to fix it. It is not afraid of being uncomfortable because it knows discomfort is the birthplace of growth. And it does not wait for the perfect moment to begin. It starts now with what is available and grows from there. It teaches us that equity is not a statement but a structure. It is not a photo op but a policy. It is not a single voice but a collective movement. And it reminds us that feminism, when real, must go beyond performance and push into the difficult, necessary, beautiful labor of change. This isn't just a speech, it's an invitation to rethink, to relearn, to rise. Feminism doesn't ask us to choose sides, it asks us to choose each other.